The power that heals. The power that heals us. The same power which created all things. That's the power that heals. The great cosmic energy of God, His consciousness moving as this tremendous energy, that's the power that heals us. That power in us, that cosmic energy, is known as life force. Life energy. That's the power that heals us. It may be covered up, camouflaged, but when you reduce it, you will find the power of God is His presence in us as cosmic energy known as life force. Life force is the great healing power. Now when that life force flows in us unobstructedly, we have health, we have harmony. But when it is obstructed by any of its various reasons, for any of its various reasons, then we have inharmony. And so the whole key to healing is to remove those things which prevent the flow of life force in us in a normal, harmonious way, and secondly, by faith in God, contact Him. And then His great power as life force will flow. Remember, first remove the obstructions, and then make your contact with God, and then His power will flow through you, giving you health of the body, health of the mind, and especially removing the ignorance of the soul. Remember, the healing power is God's power. In us, we call it life force, life energy. Master used to give a wonderful illustration about this healing power of God, or this power which does all things. He used to say, you digest your food, the functions of your body are carried on by what? By God's power in us as life force. And so he used to say, you put a dead man here and stuff him full of all good things, they'll be undigested. Why? Because the life force is not flowing in that dead man naturally. And so realize, let us remove the obstructions, and then the second thing is to contact the source of all power, God's presence in us. Then life force will flow in an unobstructed way, and we will have peace and harmony in body, in mind, and soul. Of course, there are many conditions which have to be understood. It isn't just like saying that's it. You have to understand the conditions, work on the conditions, remove them, so that God can flow through us. Now, this same power which produced us naturally can remake us. The same power which produces in the body an abnormality of any nature can remove it if you make the conditions as they should be. That inharmony can be removed because that power which made us can also remake us. God has made all things. His consciousness has become cosmic energy and produced this universe upon universe naturally. He can heal us either instantaneously or in time. Because he does not do it, does not prove it cannot be done. But there are many conditions and obstructions, we have to know them. That's the point. That's why it seems difficult. But we should never forget that God's power is supreme. But another thing we must also realize, people say, oh, I depend on God alone. And they've got something that's obvious with themselves, something wrong with themselves that should be corrected. That's nonsense. Remove that trouble. Don't take up God's time with such petty things. Because naturally He can heal that, but He's given us reason and sense we should use it. And so if it's necessary to take a pill or two, take it. God's not going to be forgotten because you do that. How do you know? How do I know how God's going to heal me? How do I know that God wants to heal me instantaneously, or He wants me to go to a physician through whom He will work? When we know God, then we'll say, well, I know He wants me to go this way. Until that, we have to go by faith, making contact with Him, using our reason and our intelligence, and being normal people. Now, we have a reference here that's very good for this time in 1 Corinthians, the 2nd chapter, the 5th verse, that your faith should not stand in the wisdom of men. Do not depend on the healing power through the wisdom of men. That does not mean you have to deny normal, sensible methods. But it goes on to say, but in the power of God. And so when you do sensibly follow a physician who is honest and sincere in his profession, when you follow him, you're not neglecting to realize the power of God is working through all ways. So remember that. But when you come to the time when the physician or the surgeon cannot help you, what are you going to do? You're going to say, Father, here I am. There's nothing left but you. But if you realize that all through your life, when that time comes, there'll be nothing to it. But if you depend on other things all the time and forget the giver of all things, even the power that heals, when these times come, it'll be difficult. God is pretty lenient. All He wants us is to not forget Him, not to forget the giver of everything, and realize that even though this great drama of life is going on, and there are ways of healing and so forth, He says, go ahead, but don't forget I'm behind everything, even medicine, physicians, and such things. God is very liberal, except in one thing. He doesn't like you or I to forget Him, that He is the doer of all things. Therefore, His power is supreme. Let us not forget that. Now we come to the point, what has to be healed? What has to be healed? Well, first, bodily diseases. I'm not going to name them because we all know them. But then, secondly, there are psychological diseases, and I got a whole list of them here. I'm not going to give you them all, but just remember that such things as fear, anger, bad habits, failure, and lack of initiative. These are diseases of the mental makeup of ourselves. They must be healed. They must be healed. Confidence. Many people do not have confidence. That's a disease. If you knew God was with you, you'd have confidence, so would I. So let us understand these things. Then also, spiritual diseases, which are the worst. They have to be healed because they deprive us from knowing our oneness with God. And I have a list longer than those psychological diseases here. But I'll just give you one or two. Ignorance, indifference, lack of purpose, intellectual pride, and dogmatism. My religion is best. I go to this church, that church. No, that's a spiritual disease you've got to get rid of. There's only one true religion. That's the universality of God's presence. And also I have skepticism, contentment with the material side of life. That's a very bad one. Because if you're contented with what you got, how are you going to know something better? How are you going to know God? And finally, ignorance of the laws of life and of man's own divinity. That's the worst spiritual disease, that disease of ignorance. And so these are the things which have to be healed. Now, there are three kinds of healing. Naturally, there's one kind of healing for each sort of disease or classification of diseases. We have the physical healing, mental healing, and spiritual healing. Now, first, the healing of bodily ailments, realize, depends upon the flow of life force in you. Understand that. The flow of life force in a normal way will govern your bodily health. And behind this normal flow of life force or lack of flow of life force is the amount of life force in the era and pingular currents of the spine or in the spiritual body which has produced this physical body. I just tell you that because you cannot see these things. When you have a bodily disease, you can see it. But these diseases, the cause of which are in our subtle body, you cannot see. But they are there. Master said the amount of current flowing in your astral body in the sympathetic nervous system region, in the Era and Pingala currents, determines your bodily health. Now realize that. Now anything that will improve the flow of current in your subtle body will give you a better bodily condition. That's the point I'm trying to bring out. One thing that comes to my mind is this. Some people wear a bangle. Why? Because it inhibits the destructive pull of these subtle currents in our astral body. It offsets them so that the building up current, or the current that gives us the normal flow of life force, is strengthened. And that's how it works. Now you cannot see it working, but it does work. And sometimes when the bodily pull or the destructive pull is great in the body, you'll find the bangle will get hot. Why? Because it's obstructing a force that's pulling you down. These things are interesting, and that's why they work. You cannot see how it works, but the great sages found those things out, and that's why a bangle sometimes is of great help in bodily diseases. And so one thing also that comes to my mind is this, that disease is generally thought to be from an outside or from external causes. It is not that. It resolves right once more back to the fact that life force is not flowing in you in the correct and right way. Inharmony is there due to the lack of the flow of life force. Now, when life force does not flow in the right way, then the cells begin to get lazy, become somatic cells, and do not do their job, so to speak, and then you have trouble. As long as life force is flowing within you, and you've got a strong nervous system, which is the way life force flows, it's the channels through which life force flows in us. If you have a strong nervous system, you can do almost anything or eat almost anything, as they say. Some people can eat anything. Others, the least little thing they eat, and they have trouble. Well, there are many deep-seated causes, but remember that the lack of flow of life force is the cause, not an external cause. If that life force is flowing strongly in you, even though you are subject to bacteria, they cannot get in. It's impossible. I've seen it work many times. But if the life force is weak due to civilization or whatever it is, this civilization in which you live and this rush, hurry and bustle, the life force does not flow, then you're subject to these things. But when you feel the strength of God with you and the life force is flowing in you, you are not subject to disease so much. So realize this life force is very important. And when the life force starts to withdraw from the cells, then the disturbance comes, then trouble comes. As I have said, if that power of God is flowing through us in a harmonious way, trouble or disease will not come so readily. Of course, we have to understand the hidden karmic causes. And so that leads us to the point of these various things that are used to heal the body, such as medicine, massage, electricity. These things are all good. Why? Because they induce the life force to flow in a more harmonious way. Now realize that. Also, there is a method known by great Larry Marcia, which cannot be told in public, but which through the power of cold stimulates the life force to flow throughout the body, stimulating those cells which are laying down on the job. Now the same law is there. The life force is induced to once more flow through us. And I have seen many cases of healing by this great method of Larry Marcia, which simply induces the power of God in us as life force to once more flow and produce a harmonious condition. And then I want to point out also about the recharging exercises of self-realization fellowship. Those of you who have had them, those of you who haven't had them should get them. The point is that by the use of those recharging exercises through the power of will and life force, you cause the life force to flow throughout the body in a more harmonious way. And no question of a doubt, you will prevent disease by following the recharging exercises of our Master. Because why? They consciously direct the life force. It's a very important point. Now, so much for the physical diseases and the way to heal them. Just remember, if you can keep the life force flowing throughout your body in a harmonious way, you'll be more healthy. And there are ways of which I've spoken, medicine, massage, electricity, and the ways which some of the students of self-realization know, Larry Marsh's treatment and others, and especially the recharging exercises of self-realization are very helpful in keeping the body healthy and well. I know in heart cases, especially in the morning, those people who have them are very sluggish. But by gently doing the recharging exercises, sending the life force throughout the body, that the arteries are opened up, and the life force flows, and the body resumes its normal activity in a much shorter time than any other method, because it's conscious control of God's power in us as life force. So much for the bodily diseases and their healing. Now, mental power, of course, is greater than physical power. Mental power is much greater, because in mental power, as will and imagination, if you consciously connect your will and imagination to the life force within you, then you have a far greater power than just autosuggestion or subconscious suggestion, where the effect is secondary, so to speak. It's automatic. If you suggest to your subconscious mind that I am well, I am strong, and all, it has its effect. But if you can look at this point and see the presence of God as a spiritual eye, and know He is in you, then when you say, I know I am well, I know I am better, I know God's power flows with me, that mental power carries weight and directs the life force directly. Because there's two things. There's the conscious phase of it, plus the life force itself. The consciousness of your will, that your will is hooked up to God's will, or that your imagination is hooked up to His imagination as He creates all things. Then that directs the life force in a much greater way. That's why mental power used correctly, not just as autosuggestion or subconscious suggestion, but when it is consciously united to the presence of God in you as life force, that is a much greater way of healing. Mental power is much better than just ordinary physical healing because of those two phases, consciousness plus life force. In the first, it's life force by these indirect ways of medicine and so forth. But when mental power is hooked up to God's presence within you, it's much more effective. And so we should realize that if we keep within ourselves the pattern of what we should and would like to be, keep that pattern there, and then make the contact with God, the pattern is bound to be projected, and we're bound to be much healthier. Mental power is greater than physical power. Master had these words to say about mental power. Let us read them. Different thoughts materialized by pranic force in God's dream. Realize that. Pranic force is life force, or cosmic energy. The thoughts of God materialize into this great creation, world upon world. So we can do likewise. If we keep the mental pattern right within ourselves, that we are children of God, and hold to it, and make the contact with God, and send the pranic energy throughout our systems, we will be like that pattern. And if that pattern is like it should be, we'll be much healthier and better. So mental power is something we should realize, but make the connection with reality, make the connection with God's presence. Then you've got something real. Now, another note I have here. On the other hand, realize these things, but don't be extremists. That is, use sensible methods. Don't think you can go immediately to God. Say, here I am, Father, now you do the rest of it. You won't do it. But work along, trying to never forget that He is the doer. That's the best way. So then we come to spiritual power. Spiritual power, of course, is the greatest. We should realize this one thing, that if we have spiritual strength, this I think is much greater than anything I have pointed out this morning. if you realize that the spiritual presence of God and His power is in you, you will have better bodily and mental powers and health. Do you understand? Because spiritual power is supreme. Spiritual power is behind all things. Now, if you can contact God, know He's with you, and see His presence as the spiritual eye at this point, or feel the bliss in your heart, or hear the cosmic sound, if you can do any of those things, you have conscious connection with God. That's the greatest method of healing, and then your bodily health will be better, and your mental health will be more efficient. That's a very important point, is in spiritual healing or spiritual power, you must realize first your oneness with God. Now, how to do it? If God is the Word, if you can hear the cosmic sound, if you can see the cosmic light at this point, if you can feel the bliss of God in your heart, you'll have contact with God. Then, realizing you have contact with God, whatever you say to Him, whatever you consciously try to do to direct the will, the life force anyway, any place, it will go, because God is supreme. That's why spiritual healing or spiritual power is far greater than these other ways. And so, remember this, realization of your oneness with God opens up vistas of power for you, because God is supreme. But you must realize your oneness with Him. It is not too difficult. God is the Word. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. Now the Word has these aspects. The cosmic sound, which many of you hear, when you're used to it, you can hear it anytime, any place. You know God is with you. These are facts. The cosmic light you can see after practice, and when His grace comes, all the time with you. And His bliss, those who feel God is with them, they know the bliss of His presence. These are fundamentals in healing. And if you can make the contact with God, that power which heals, which is God's presence, which is great cosmic energy, will surely flow through you. Spiritual healing, of course, is the greatest. We have to get the contact of God is to remove the delusion which makes us think that this material consciousness is supreme. That's the delusion. When we feel I am the body and everything is flowing in around that center, that is delusion. That's not true. The truth is that we are children of God, changeless, not subject to the wave action. We must realize that. And so delusion can be removed. How? By applying the opposite law, the law of undoing the delusion, undoing those things that make us feel we are not God's children, undoing them. And the best way is to follow one who has found God as our beloved Master and merge in the presence of God through the methods He has left. I know of no better way. If you can feel the contact of God, hear the cosmic vibration, see the great light of God, feel His love in your heart, no delusion can remain. No delusion can remain. It's impossible. Now that's the law of offsetting material consciousness by replacing it with the presence of God. And so, Master has said there's no question, but the bliss consciousness which we feel is God's presence within us. Everybody can feel that easily. Some hear more easily than others. Some see the light where others don't. But at least one of those things which designates the presence of God can be felt and understood. I'm hurrying a little bit because I promised somebody I'd get through 1:15. I got about 1 minute. But it's wonderful to feel the power of God, even if you have to hurry a little bit. He helps you along. So, in the last analysis, realize this, that God is the possessor of all power, and He is the one who heals. Never forget that. Patanjali said, I don't know who God is. I can't describe Him to you, but I do know He is. Now we can know that. We can feel that. We can realize that God is by following one who realized that. as our beloved Master. And still, if we can break the attachment to this worldly consciousness, this outer consciousness, if we can do that, then we will know the one who really heals, God himself. And I will close by this one illustration which the Master used to give so many times. Doctor, why do you fool around with these little secondary things? Why don't you know the storekeeper, the Master of the universe? He can give you the whole store. And these are facts. These are facts. If God is our own consciousness and we are one with him, if we know him, won't we have what he has? But doubts creep in, and then we begin to wonder whether it's so. It is so. The storekeeper can give you all things. Know the storekeeper. And I'll close with a verse in St. John. But as many as received him, to them gave he the power to become the sons of God, even those that believe on his name. And so as many as received him simply means as many as merged in his presence in themselves as the holy sound, the light, or the bliss of God. To them he gave the same power that God has. Let us not forget that. That's the power that heals. If we have that and know that, then we have all things. God is supreme. He is our Father, your Father, my Father. Why should we worry? Know him, and we will have all things. God is.